All right, so I'm going to do an overview video just covering all of the features and just where everything is and how to use everything in Arborea. So the add-on comes with a lot. There's a lot of different sections, as you can see: the Arborea panel, the asset section, materials, animation, tools and generators, and the scatter section. So I'm just going to go through each of these sections one by one and just cover everything there is to cover about this, so you guys know where everything is and how to use it. All right, so for installing Arborea, we can go over to Edit, Preferences, and then in here we can go to Add-ons, click this drop-down, Install from Disk, and then I'm just going to go to the folder where my zip file is. So arborea.zip, and of course whatever version you have. Select this, Install from Disk, then it should just take like 2 seconds, and then it's going to be loaded in right here. By default, it's not going to have the packs installed just yet, so if you go in here, you're going to get this. So the way you can install the asset packs is down here, which actually there's kind of this written tutorial to show you how to do it as well, but let me cover this. So in here, the assets folder is basically where to install the asset packs. So you're going to be given, depending on what version you have, 1 or 2 different Arborea asset packs. And basically to install those packs, the add-on just unzips those files into whatever folder you choose here. So I already have an Arborea assets folder, but let me just create a new one. So I'm just going to do test folder, click enter, and then accept. So now I have this set as the assets folder. And then I can either do install single pack. So if you have the light version and you only have 1 pack, you can do that. Or you can do install all from a folder, which I'm going to do here because I do have multiple packs. So I'm going to go to that folder and I have Arborea pack 1 and 2. I can just click this folder, install packs from folder. We're going to get this pop-up that says 1 and 2. And then it gives you a warning that it might take 10 to 90 seconds, just depending on your system. So try not to click around or, mess around with that, because Blender will kind of like turn gray and then, lag and possibly crash. But I'm going to click OK, and it's just going to load for a second. Okay, so that installed, and once everything's installed, it's going to say installed packs, 1 or 2, depending on how many you have, and then show those here. So now, if you click this pop-up, everything should start loading in. And if you have any issues, this doesn't pop up, you can either do refresh assets here or refresh here as well. All right, so let's cover a few other things like updating or relinking missing assets. So first, for updating, this is really simple to do, especially if you're only updating the main add-on and not any asset packs. So to do this, all you have to do is basically just go in here, click uninstall. This is going to delete this from whatever folder it's installed in. And then once you do this, click OK. Then exit out of Blender. This is just going to give you the cleanest install. So I'm just going to exit out of Blender and then come back in here, and then basically install Arborea the same exact way. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the same version just because updating is the exact same process as this, but install from disk. It's going to take a second to load. And then since I'm not updating the asset packs, all I have to do is just go to that same assets folder that I specified before. So test folder, select this, accept, and then now it's already installed. So updating takes like 2 seconds. If I do have an asset pack that I need to update, so say I made like an update to the asset packs and you downloaded those and you need to update that, then you can just go over here, remove all packs, and then just install the new packs the same way as you did with these ones. So updating is really easy to do, pretty simple. And then also if you open up a project and it's missing like libraries or assets or textures or something, you can use relink missing assets. So I recommend not moving this directory. So like if you set an assets folder and start making projects and later want to change this, you might run into some issues with like missing objects or textures or something, just because those projects will read from this folder. So I recommend trying to keep this in the same spot that you originally create that folder, and then you won't run into any issues. But if you do have any missing objects, missing textures or anything, just come into the preferences, click relink missing assets, and that will take care of that for you. So I'm going to start with the asset browser, and there's 2 ways you can access this. There's the pop-up browser, which you can access this by clicking spawn asset. And this will bring up the pop-up browser, which you can spawn an asset, move your mouse away, and that pop-up will disappear. Then there's also the dockable windowed browser. So you can click this, choose an area like this right here, and then you have your asset browser right here, like you see. So the pop-up browser is more so if you just want to like quickly import something, have that disappear, and then move on. This is for if you want to basically have something always there and visible to work with. So you can just like, scatter something, move that around, and just always have this visible and accessible directly on screen. So These are both essentially laid out the exact same. I'm going to do most of the asset browser explanation in the windowed browser just so I can move the mouse around without it disappearing like this, as you see. But they're laid out essentially the same. So what I cover in the windowed browser will also apply for this. Okay, so in here, there is the categories and then the filters and all of that. So each category is basically, as it says, hedges, shrubs, giant trees, tropical, etc. So this is where you can basically sort out everything, or you can just go through all and then just scroll and find all the assets here. You can also middle mouse click and drag when you're in the windowed browser, by the way, and this will also allow you to scroll up and down as well. This is what I like to do. That's generally how I access everything. And then when you're in here, you can see there's the import button. This is just going to import the asset. And by default, I have linked and then 3D cursor. So these are the import settings. By default, 3D cursor is the import location. So if I move my 3D cursor over here and then I click import on this young western larch, it's going to import where my 3D cursor is. Same thing over here. Yeah. So pretty self-explanatory. If you want to change that, you can do world center. It's always going to import at the world center and ignore the 3D cursor. And then also linked is going to import as linked. If you set this to append, it's going to append it in. And I suggest keeping it on linked by default just because linked assets are going to use a lot less memory. You're just linking the asset from an external scene. So a lot of the memory isn't actually directly in your blend file, which is just going to make bigger scenes much quicker, use a lot less memory. And then you can just use the convert local, convert linked section right here if you want to convert a linked asset to local to make a material edit or, actually go into edit mode or something. So the difference between this is you can't click tab to go into edit mode, as you can see. So I'm clicking tab to go into edit mode and nothing's happening. I can't edit the material unless I convert this to local. And then if I want to, animate this or something, I have to convert it to local. But for general scene building, I suggest keeping it all local. And then when you need to, just convert whatever assets you need to local. Okay. And then right here is the collection management. So by default, it uses the Arborea collections. So if I just import this coniferous, this hedge, how about this grass right here? And then I come into the collections, you're going to see it's going to have the Arborea assets collection. And then whatever assets you import are going to import into their own category. Basically, all grasses are going to go into the grasses category, all hedges will go into hedges, and so on. If you switch this to active collection, whatever collection is active in the outliner, that's going to be where this imports. So you can choose either or, doesn't matter. And if you go into the preferences for Arborea, you can actually go down here and, import type, spawn location, and collection. Set these in the preferences, save your preferences, and then every time you open up Blender, that's going to be what shows right here by default. So if you do this directly in the pop-up, it's going to go back to these defaults whenever you close and reopen Blender. If you change it here in the preferences and then save preferences, whatever you set here will never change unless you change it. So back into here now. All right. And then style and seasons. This is how you can basically sort everything. Summer is just going to only show summer assets. If you turn on autumn, it's only going to show autumn assets. Winter, same thing. Or you can just click multiple and, solo out just a couple, select them again to hide them. And then fantasy is going to solo out just the fantasy, just the realistic. At the moment, there's not too many fantasy ones, but there will be a lot more fantasy assets with upcoming updates. But this is how you can sort out just the fantasy ones like the tree bridge and so on like that. Okay, cool. So we have that taken care of, and you're going to see these stars right here, which when you hover over it says toggled favorite. This is going to actually let you use the favorites category. So basically if I go into here and say choose this tree right here, click the star, it's going to highlight. Let's do this quaking aspen, and then how about this hedge? And I go into favorites. Now we have these in our favorites category. They still show up in their other category in here, but they also show up in here as well. So any asset you find yourself using a lot and, just it's in most projects that you use, you can add those to favorites, and then for quick access, they'll just be sorted out directly in here. And then this button right here is going to allow you to actually filter this first. So if I go into all and click this star, your favorites are going to show up at the top of each category. So if I'm in all my favorites are going to show up at the top. If I go into deciduous, these will show up on the top, and so on. So a lot of flexibility with your favorites. If you want to get rid of one, just click the star again, and it's just going to remove that. Okay, so scatter actions, this menu right here, I'm not going to talk too much about this because this will be more so covered with the scatter section, but this is how you can actually scatter from the asset browser directly, and this is also in the pop-up, as you can see. They work the exact same. But let me just do this real fast. I'm going to set that as an emitter. I'll cover this later, as I just mentioned, so don't worry too much about this yet. If I go into grass and then say this right here. So scatter asset is just going to scatter whatever asset is selected. And you can see it just created a scatter system in Sweeper Scatter. And by default, you're going to see here in scatter settings, I have include variations enabled. So what this is doing is basically it's just importing every variation of that specific asset that you created a scatter system from so that you don't have to import them all one at a time. So as you can see right here, there's generic grass 1, 2, and 3. So there's 3 different variations of generic grass. When I did scatter asset for this, it also imported the other ones as well. So you actually have all of the variation without having to, scatter asset, scatter asset, scatter asset all individually. And if I do that the same with here, it's going to, import all of these variations as well. If I toggle this off and I create a system with the Liberta 3, it's going to only create a scatter system with that specific object. So turn that on or off depending on what you want, but generally I will use that for pretty much everything. So I always keep that on. Display as bounds is going to import the system as display as bounds. As you can see right here, it's this setting right there. This is really good for big systems, especially because if you don't display as bounds and you have well, I guess this isn't too slow, but generally if you have like a few systems somewhat dense and you aren't displaying as bounds, it's going to be very slow in the viewport. So this just makes it a lot faster in here. And then hide viewport, this just hides the scatter system in the viewport by default, as you can see. Just kind of like a safety precaution, if you're about to import something on a very large plane, this is a good thing to do just so you don't have to worry about crashing your system right away. Then you can lower the density and then, slowly bring it up however much you need. Okay, so tools and generators. I'm not going to cover really any of this just yet because we're not in the tools and generators section, but this is where you can import the tools and generators, which you will find inside of here. You can access this in here as well. Clicking this button just basically does the same thing as switching to this tab in the asset browser, but this is going to be where you find all of the tools and generators. Categories work the exact same. The rest of the browser is pretty simple. There's not really too many tools just yet, but with future updates, I'm going to keep adding a lot of my geometry nodes tools. So this is going to grow quite a bit as well. But yeah, we'll cover that more in a little bit, but this is how you can switch back and forth between assets and tools. All right, so one last thing before I move on from the asset browser is let's go to the pop-up real fast. I'm going to click this X to close out of this. And let's go into the pop-up. In here, we have the browser settings, and you can actually change the size of this. So if I do small, and then I hover out here to close it and open up again, now we have a much smaller browser. So if you have a smaller screen, you can resize it this way. If you want to make it really large, now it's a lot larger. I generally like medium, but I also have a really big screen, so it doesn't really take up too much space. And if you want even more control, you can use columns and rows. So columns, if you bring this up, it's going to make it a lot wider, as you can see, or you can make it more narrow. You can make it taller. So more flexibility on that as well. So you can basically just set this up however you want, but I feel like 4x5 is a pretty good route to go with this. So I guess one last thing to cover for this is when I click choose browser area, you're going to see select a window to dock the browser, but you can also control click to create a floating window. So if I hold control and then just left click anywhere, it's going to create a floating window. So now what this is doing is this is always going to be on top. And I find this to be good for if you have like a multiple monitor setup. And what I use this for sometimes is I have a monitor underneath my main one, and I'll just sometimes put that to be full screen on my second monitor. That way I can have my top monitor where I'm working and then my second monitor below that where all of my assets are. And I can just go through and spawn assets from my second monitor and have everything just open and free right here. So yeah, lots of flexibility here. And let's move on to the next section now. All right, now let's cover the Arborea panel. So there's switch asset, transform selection, and convert object. So switch asset, this is probably my most used section in the Arborea panel. Randomized variant is super helpful especially, but let's cover the seasons first. So summer, autumn, and winter. For the most part, every tree and some shrubs have different seasonal variations. As you can see, there's the autumn and winter and then the default summer. This just automates the process of deleting this and then re-importing the seasonal variation, so you don't actually have to do that manually. So if I click autumn, it's going to be the autumn version. If I click winter, it's going to automatically switch to the winter version. The nice part about this too is everything keeps the same transform. So if I scale this up, rotate these around, and then I do autumn, it automatically just switches and keeps the same transforms. So this is super helpful. It doesn't change your scene at all. I use this a lot for like if I make like a winter scene and then I want to convert that scene to be a summer scene, all I really have to do is, well, let's just bring in a few different assets real fast. So do these 3 different trees, and then how about that? So I have all of these right now. If I click winter, it's going to actually convert all of my selections to winter. Same thing with summer. So I wouldn't suggest selecting every asset in an entire scene at once to convert, just because what it's doing is deleting that asset and then re-importing the other versions of those assets into the same spot. So if you're doing this for like 50 different assets at one time, it probably will be a little bit slow. It might crash your system, but I would suggest doing this for like maybe 5, 6 at a time at most. Just kind of like go through your scene and convert those a few at a time, just so you don't crash anything. But this is super helpful for just converting entire scenes to different, seasons. Or you can actually just, test out different seasons as well. So you can just, try out an autumn version, maybe switch to winter on one, take off the snow, and so on. So super helpful. I use that a lot. And let's bring this back over to the center. Okay, so randomized variant. This is really helpful. I use this a lot for pretty much every scene. This just randomizes the variant for that asset specifically. So this one has 4 different versions. It's just basically going to delete the current version and then re-import a random selection of those other 4. And same thing, if I rotate this around, scale this up or something, it keeps the same transforms. This is super helpful for if I just remove this real fast and say, let's bring in like a rock or something. So rock 1. If I do Alt D, duplicate this, randomize variant, move this around, randomize variant. So you can very quickly just kind of import one and then duplicate it, randomize it, duplicate it, randomize it. And you can just get a lot of variations this way very quickly. I use this a lot for flowers too. So like with this, if I'm creating like a flower cluster or something, I can just kind of bring this up, duplicate it, rotate it around, randomize the variant. Maybe I don't want that one, so I'll randomize it again. I kind of like that one. So this is super helpful. I use this a lot, and it comes in handy for a lot of different things. So transform selection, pretty simple. Randomize just basically randomizes the transforms, and it's also localized. So if I like rotate this around, scale this, randomize, it's going to randomize around that point. Reset is just going to reset to its default transform. So if I like scale this up and rotate this around like that, reset's just going to reset it to basically default. Okay, and then convert. So we talked about this a little bit in the asset browser section, but this is how you can convert local assets to linked or linked assets to local. Right now it's linked, so I can't go into edit mode. As you can see, I'm clicking tab and nothing's happening. If I try to edit materials, it says convert to local. Same thing for animation. And this is good for saving memory. I recommend using linked assets for pretty much everything, just because a lot of times you aren't going to be editing specific assets. But when you do need to edit those, just click local. Now, if I click tab, I can actually edit the asset directly. And then same thing with like animation. I can just basically, enable animation. So, and yeah, this right here, cleanup file, what this does is just goes and basically deletes all unused like data. So it's basically the same thing as just going up here and then going to clean up and then purge unused and then getting rid of, well, as you can see right here, there's a lot of unused stuff right here. It's just going to free up a lot of memory. It's just a quick button right here, so you don't have to actually go up here and do this in the drop down. Okay, for the materials section, I have a local asset right here. So as you can see, it's a local asset now. If I click edit materials, this is just going to let you basically use all of the node group settings for whatever materials are on that object. So as you can see, I can edit like hue, saturation, brightness, and so on. Let me open up the shader editor real fast as well. So as you can see right here, I have basically the same settings in each node group. So what this pop-up is doing is basically just wrapping this node group in a pop-up. Same thing for the bark. It has pretty much all these settings in here as well. So you can basically access all the exact same features in the shader editor node groups or this pop-up, just depending on what you want to do. Generally, this is a little bit faster because you don't actually have to open up the shader editor or navigate to whatever node groups you need inside of here. But let me close that over and then open up this pop-up. Let's go to leaves. And also, as you can see, this top section, it just displays whatever materials are on that object. So as you can see, leaves and bark. And then here, it's just basically selecting those two materials. So if this object had 4 different materials, there would be 4 different materials up here. But for the most part, usually there's only 2 or 3. So global settings, this is just kind of like the global like hue, saturation, brightness, just kind of like the basic effects. So hue is going to let you choose the color. This is just using a hue and saturation node, exact same values. So if you're used to using a hue and saturation, these values are going to work the exact same. Around like 0.4 or so is going to be a little bit more yellowish orange. And then it's going to just cycle into like this purple, pink, blue is going to be on the like higher side. So this allows you to manipulate the color. Saturation, you can either desaturate or add more saturation. And then brightness, same thing here. I wouldn't recommend going too high for the most part. Sometimes I go a little bit higher if I need to, but sometimes it just makes it look really, really bright. So I wouldn't recommend that. And then translucent, this is the amount of basically light that's allowed to pass through your object. So if I bring this up, it gets a little bit brighter, not too much because it's already pretty high. But if I bring this down, then no light's going to pass through. So I find 0.75 to be a pretty good value, but sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less. So that allows you to control that. Okay, now for the seasons. So seasons, winter is going to basically kind of turn them to this like yellowish, kind of desaturated orange, kind of like a wintry color. And then it's just going to add white to the tops of the leaves, kind of like snow and frost. So that's what the winter slider does. Good for winter scenes. And then spring, this just kind of makes it a little bit more bright and kind of like saturated and more of like a springtime color. Summer is not going to probably do much at all just because it's already a summer asset, but this just makes it a kind of like a summer green. So you don't really need that slider most of the time, but sometimes it comes in handy. Okay, so autumn. Autumn is a bit more complicated, not by much. There's just like an extra slider involved with autumn, but this allows you to basically change the color. It's similar to this, but the colors allowed are more autumn-like, as you can see. So yellow is going to be 1, and then orangish yellow is going to be kind of in between. And then 0.5 is where it starts to get to like this darker orange, and then it goes into this reddish color. So for some assets, pure red is going to be a little bright. So right now it's pretty bright on this one. And with the autumn slider, generally to make the autumn colors look best, I'll also use the global settings as well. So for this, I might lower the saturation slightly and also maybe lower the brightness. Something like this. I think that looks a little bit better. So now you got more of like an autumn color here. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend playing around with these two different sections together if you're using the autumn slider. I generally find for like the yellow, having a little bit more brightness, maybe a little bit more saturation looks pretty good. But yeah, it really just depends on what you want. So yeah, mess around with all of that. And then random leaf color. This is really good for if you want just some randomized color per leaf. So as you can see right now, every leaf is a different color versus the default green. And this uses a hue slider as well. So the leaf minimum hue right here allows you to control the minimum color range and then the maximum color range right here. So if I just do 0.5, nothing's going to change because, you know, minimum is 0.5, maximum is 0.5. But if I bring this down just slightly like that, now they're going between 0.5 on the hue slider and 0.45 on the hue slider. Generally, I'll go something like this, somewhere around like 0.35 or so to get a little bit of like an orange, yellow, and green. and then maybe increase the saturation just slightly, and then a little bit more brightness to make it look a little bit better. And then you can also control basically like how much of each color shows. So the more minimum and the more max. If I go more minimum, it's going to show more of that minimum hue. So you can see there's less green now and more of the orange. If I go more max, there's only going to be a few oranges here and there. So this allows for a lot of flexibility on basically what leaves are getting randomized and what colors you're using and like where they're showing up. So let's bring that down. And then random color cluster. This is pretty similar, but instead of randomizing each individual leaf, it randomizes the color in clusters. And this is just using a noise texture. So if you've ever used a noise texture before, it's kind of similar. As you can see, I can change the scale of it, I can change the seed of it, which actually let's do this so I can see it a little bit more. And then the hue, minimum and max, works the exact same as in the per leaf. So minimum is the minimum color range, maximum is the maximum. Seed is just going to randomize like the placement of the noise texture. Noise scale is the size of the noise texture. Generally I keep it around 1, I find that to be good. And then these sliders right here do the exact same as these ones right here. So you can actually control kind of like the sharpness of the fall off and basically like how much of each of those colors is showing. Okay, let's go to the bark now. So we have the bark, let's go to there. And now we have moss, which right now we're not seeing any moss, but that's probably because it's on the other side of the tree. Yeah. So I'm moving the direction around, which is actually moving the moss to a different side of the tree. And if I do spread, it's going to actually spread around a little bit more. So yeah, pretty easy to work with. This is really good for if you want moss in your trunks. If you just add a really high spread, then it's just going to go around the entire trunks too, which is going to sometimes look good as well, which actually kind of looks pretty good right here. And then snow, this is going to basically just add snow to your trunks. So very similar to what it was doing with the leaves. So if I come over here and actually, let's move this, and then let's add winter. It's basically doing the same thing. So if you're making a winter scene, you can just add that to both of your materials, and then it's going to look a lot more frosted and snowy. And yeah, so the bark one is a little bit more basic. There's only a few different sections right there, but they become helpful sometimes too. So let's go over here now, and I'm going to bring in some grass. So for this, let's actually just create a quick scatter system real fast. Okay, so I just made a grass system just so we can see all of these settings a little bit more easily on an entire system. So we have our global settings, works the exact same. You can change the global hue, saturation, which if I bring this to 0, actually if we bring this to 0 and the brightness up a bit, we get these kind of like brighter white colors as well, which could actually be really cool for some like kind of like fantasy or a different color forest if you want to do that. Let's bring these back to default. And then seasons. So we have dry grass, which dry grass just kind of overlays this with a more of like a dry color and a little bit more desaturated. But you actually have access to this color right here. So if this isn't the correct color that you want, you can actually just overlay a different color with this color wheel. So you can fine tune this pretty much however you need. If you need more saturation, less brightness, and so on, you can do so with that. And then frosted tips is just going to basically add like frost to the grass. And you can actually just control basically like the height of this as well. So you see frost height, if I bring this up, it's going to actually cover more frost on there and make them even brighter white. Or you can just do the very tops with this. And also you don't need dry grass to be using this as well. I can actually just bring dry grass down and it works the exact same. All right, now winter. So winter is kind of similar. It adds dry grass and snow, basically all in one. So this one basically works just like the leaf shader and the snow shader on the bark. And then spring, pretty similar as well. It brightens it up, adds more of this kind of like spring green color to it. So yeah, the grass shader is pretty easy to work with, pretty simple. And yeah, those are all of the node groups for the material properties, how you can use them, what they do. And as I mentioned before, you can either use this or you can go into the shader editor and it all works the exact same. The node groups in the shader editor do generally have more settings. So if you need like very specific controls, all of the advanced settings are generally inside of this node group. But yeah, all of the essential material controls are in this pop-up. Okay, so let's move on to the animation section. So by default, it's only going to be able to work with local Arborea assets. So if I just bring in like, say my like base character right here, it's not going to, let you animate this. It's going to say animation is only available for Arborea assets. If I select this, it requires a local asset, and that's just because this is a linked asset right now. So I'm going to convert this to local, and then now we have our animation options right here. So this is pretty easy to work with. I am going to probably be updating the animation system pretty soon, just because I do want to actually have a more kind of like in-depth and complex kind of animation system. Right now it's just kind of two basic controls, but yeah, for the time being, this is how this works. So if I just click medium wind, it's going to add the medium wind preset here. As you can see, it adds leaf wind and a little bit of trunk bend. You can adjust all of these controls directly inside of here. So wind strength on the trunk, generally a pretty low value looks pretty good for this. Wind speed is how fast the wind's going. Again, a lower speed for this is usually pretty okay. And then seed is just going to allow you to basically offset the noise pattern that this is using. So if you don't really like the animation pattern you're getting, you can just type in a random number, like something like that, and it's just going to offset that animation pattern. Then noise scale for the leaves. This is the scale of the noise pattern that is basically used to displace the leaves. So if I bring this up a bit, it's going to look a little bit slower and more gradual. If I bring this down, the noise pattern is going to be a lot smaller, so it's going to affect the leaves in a lot more of a kind of like chaotic way. So I find kind of like a range around here to here to look pretty good for like trees and such. But also depending on the size of the asset, these controls will be a little bit different. Speed is going to adjust the speed that this moves as well. So you can see 100% is a little bit too fast, but somewhere around here can look pretty good. I'll generally keep this really low as well. And then strength is just basically how much this displaces the leaves. So light breeze, basically just a preset. It just basically changes these values, and then you can also just adjust them however you need. Strong wind, same thing. And let's go over here and let's actually just delete this and bring in like a shrub or something. So let's do the spice bush. Let's make that local. Let's go bush medium wind. And yeah, so medium wind for the bush is generally a good preset for bushes, shrubs, and anything kind of like of this scale in general. So if I bring my character over here, this range to somewhere that's also around like this range is pretty good for the bush presets. Let me bring in like a plant or something now. So let's do an areca, make this local. So plants of this scale and size are generally good for like small plants. You could probably get away with the bush medium and light breeze as well. Yeah, just kind of depending on what you want. The bush one will kind of affect these a little bit more strongly just because these are a little bit smaller of assets. But yeah, you don't actually have to use the specific preset types for, specific asset types. That's just they're just kind of made to look good for those specific things. If I bring in some grass, like let's say this tall grass right here, and put on the grass preset, let's do medium grass wind. It just kind of displaces this a bit and bends it around a little bit. So yeah, the animation section is pretty easy to work with, pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, let's move on now to the tools and generators. Okay, so the tools and generators section. I already showed you earlier, this is how you can access this browser as well. But this button also does the exact same thing. It just opens up the asset browser on the tools and generators section. You can click import, it imports the tool, whatever one's in here. So pretty much the exact same as with the asset browser. We also have these arrows right here, which is previous tool and next tool. So you don't actually have to open up the browser if you don't want to. You can actually just cycle next or previous, which especially right now, since I only have 4 tools at the moment, this is really easy to work with. I can just cycle through real quick until I get to the tool I want or back, whatever. But yeah, let's start with the giant procedural vine, since this is the first one on the list. This is my favorite tool. I use this in almost every single scene I work with. So I'm gonna click import. And yeah, this just imports a giant vine. And yeah, this is a lot of fun to work with. This is like my go-to tool for everything. But in here, you're gonna see draw vine and clear vine. And what this is gonna do is draw vine is just gonna go into edit mode and set it to draw mode. So I can actually just draw whatever I want. And then, if I'm working around, I can do whatever. I click draw. It's just going to go enter draw mode. It's not going to delete anything. It's just going to let you go back into draw mode. But say I don't like what I have, or you just import this and then you want to clear it and start something fresh, you can do clear vine. Clear vine's going to delete it and then enter draw mode so you can start fresh and draw just basically whatever you want. So I don't like that. I'll clear it. And you don't actually have to draw them as well. So drawing is super nice to work with at the start. But usually what I'll do is I'll draw something like this, and then I'll go over here to transform. And this just works exactly like a normal Bezier curve. These are actually just generating on a real Bezier curve. So if I just grab this point here, I can actually just move this around. And I can rotate these points and kind of scale them in whatever way I need. So yeah, you can really just position this exactly however you need. And then if I have something like this, but I do want to kind of like extend this or like move this a little bit farther out, I can click E, extrude this out. I can even just shift D a point and then extrude that out and create a brand new one. So yeah, there's lots of different options you can do. Let's do something like that. So we have this, and then vine taper. If I just expand this right here, this will show you a float curve. So as you can see, it gets a little bit thicker at the beginning right here, and then it tapers off towards the end. If I bring this to 0, now it's going to get really small towards the tip. If I bring this up, it's going to actually expand even more than the bottom. So this lets you actually shape the exact kind of like taper of your tool. So you can like make it bigger in the center. You can make it really small in the center. And generally, like if I'm making like a bridge or something, yeah, so if like I'm connecting this between like two floating islands or something like that, I like kind of tapering both sides. And then I can kind of use this as some sort of like root bridge or something like that. I mean, this is a pretty bad example just because I haven't really spent time kind of, setting up the correct shape for this and whatnot. But yeah, so vine resolution, this is generally a good kind of route to go. 24 is not too much, but it still looks really good. But if you have a slow system, you can lower this if you want to the bare minimum. It's not going to look as good. As you can see, it's pretty jagged, but it's going to be lower resolution. It's going to respond a lot faster than it did at 24 because now it's a little bit more laggy, and that's just adjusting the subdivision count. So you can make this a little bit more as well if you want. So if you want to be really high resolution, make that a lot higher, but I don't suggest that unless you're making like a close-up or something like that. Twist is going to be the twist right here. So if I actually zero this out, it's just going to be straight. There's not going to be any twist at all. If I go into the negatives, it's going to twist the other way, but default goes to the right by 10. So outer vines, this is the radius of your outer vines. And then underneath this, there's the minimum and maximum. So if I put this all to 1, the minimum and maximum, every outer vine is going to be the exact same scale. If I put minimum to 0, now some of them are going to be randomly scaled between 0 and 100%. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Let's go back to 0.5 or something. Displacement is, well, as you can see right here, it's kind of like lumpy. There's like this displacement kind of making this look a little bit more noisy. If I bring this down, they're going to be just more cylindrical, less noisy. You can make this really jagged, but you're going to probably need more subdivisions if you want that to look good. Noise scale, this just scales the noise texture that we're using to displace this. And then branches. Branches are these right here. So if I increase the count, there's more of these branches. If I lower the count, there's less of these branches. Branch length, can make them really long or really short. And then radius, how thick these are. So on each branch, there's also the leaves. So you can get rid of the leaves or you can add more if you want. You can also change the scale of the leaves. So vine moss, this just turns on a scatter system, which I have it set to display as bounds by default just because these can make it a little bit slower if you don't have them set to display as bounds. But if I go into rendered view, you're just going to see it actually just scatters some moss directly on the vine. But yeah, it's set to display as bounds by default just so it's not as slow. But I'm going to set that back to 0, turn that off, and then this is the material of your actual vine, which by default, I think this one looks really good. I pretty much don't ever change it, but if you do want to change the material, you can change it this way, you can see. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this. So I'm just going to do remove tool system. Let's go over to IVGen now. So I'm going to create a plane. Let's scale this plane up to like something like that. and maybe let's bring in some cubes. So I'm going to select all of these, the plane and these cubes, and then click Import Tool. So now the IVGen is going to generate on all of the objects that you had selected when clicking Import Tool. So as you can see, if I move this around, the IV is going to generate on all of these objects, and it's going to update based on where it's at, where it moves to, the scale of it, and all of that. If I click this, I can move it around as well, which actually let me turn off the overlay so you can see this a bit better. So yeah, it's just a generator for IV that just reacts to the world around it. And if I want to add another object, so say I like duplicate this and move this over here, it's ignoring the IV, but I can click this right here, add selected object, and now it's within the system. If I decide I don't want one in here, so like this one right here, I can do remove, and now the IV is not going to affect that. So let's put these back in here. And the settings are pretty self-explanatory. Vine count is how many vines there are. I would be careful with these settings, by the way. Geometry Nodes generators can be a little bit heavy, especially if you're not careful with the values. So go kind of slow or just manually type in the values. Vine length is the length of the vines. And then seed is just going to randomize, well, the generation of it. Leaf density is basically how many leaves there are, the leaf scale, and then the vine radius. Okay, cool. So I'm going to remove this now, and let's go to the next tool. So let's do this one. So the vine generator. So this is really good for like drawing vines, and I use this a lot as well. So I'm just going to import this, and this works pretty much in the same way as the giant procedural vine tool worked. It just has some different options as well. So for this, I'm just going to cover the options I didn't cover with the giant procedural vine tool. But as you can see right here, there's vine type, single, multi, and then draw mode, cursor, and surface. So single is going to basically be a single vine, just like you see here. Multi is going to be a multi-vine, which is very similar to the procedural vine tool, the giant one that we just covered. It's going to be kind of a smaller version of that with a little bit more variety. For drawing, I like to basically use single and surface. So if I go clear vine and then just start drawing on different surfaces, you can see it's just this vine. That's very easy to basically get whatever shape you need. You can still convert this to multi if you want as well, or back and forth, doesn't really matter. You can also combine the workflows too. So if I change this to cursor, I can just start kind of drawing wherever I need now, and it's not going to react to the surface. So generally the way I use this is if I'm drawing them on like the walls or like different objects, I like using the basic single vine. But if I'm using these to kind of like hang between different objects, I like using the multi just because I find that works a little bit better, as you can see. So that's just my preference, but you guys will probably, the more you use this, figure out the things that work best for your different scenarios you're using this for. All right, yeah, so radius, radius, leaf density, leaf scale, all of this is pretty self-explanatory, the exact same workflow as the procedural giant vine tool, the random minimum and maximum, all of that together. So yeah, let's move on to the snow generator now. Okay, for the snow generator, I just brought in an asset from my collaboration asset pack with Max Hay. I just have these stairs right here. If I select these and click import tool, it's going to generate snow on the object. And depending on the size of the object, the snow might look really good, or it might look a little bit weird at first. This right now looks a little bit weird just because of the object scale. But what I can do is I can do like a radius of like 0.1 or so. So yeah, radius, as you can see, changes the radius of the snow generator. And then slope is going to kind of be like the threshold of the slope. It's like if you only want this to be on very flat surfaces, lower this value. But if you want the maximum slope this can generate on to be a little bit more steep, you can just bring this up. And as you can see, it's generating on more area on the object. Voxel amount is going to be kind of like the resolution of this snow. So if I go into wireframe, you're going to see this. If I go to like 100, now it's a lot more low resolution. It looks, well, pretty bad. Let's try like 180. Let's actually just start lowering this. So you can see in the wireframe, it's just getting a little bit more low resolution. There's starting to become like some holes. So this will of course use less polys, but it won't look as good. If I go something like 350, it's going to be a lot more dense and it'll probably look a lot better, but it will be a lot slower. So just keep that in mind. 215 is generally a good route to go with that. Adaptivity is kind of like a decimate. So if I start cranking this up, now you're going to see it's actually kind of like decimating this. So I generally find around like 0.5 or so to be a good route for this. If I need to like increase this, I'll probably also increase the adaptivity just to kind of like reduce the poly count if I need to. All right, so let's click X to remove this. All right, so now let's just talk about basically how I can use these all together now and just some of the other things that are in the tools and generators section. So let me just import a couple IV generators. So as you can see, I can select them and it's going to actually select directly in the tool system. Same thing here. If I want to get rid of one, I can click this X. If I want to set one to display as bounds, I can click this. Or if I want to hide one, I can click this. And then right here too, so we have make single user and then also duplicate. So if I select one and then click duplicate, it's just going to duplicate that system. So if I move that over, you can see it's a duplicate. I'm going to remove that real fast. And then this right here, so let me remove these two. So this button right here, make single user, this is good for situations like this. If I were to just select one right here, go Shift D to duplicate it, and maybe do this a couple times. And as you can see right now, if I change the seed, it actually changes for all three of these just because I actually just duplicated these in the viewport, which this can be really good because sometimes I'm trying to generate ivy in like giant patches like this on one object, and I want to be able to control these all together like this. But also sometimes I decide I want to actually make one of these a single user and have their own system right here. I can just select that one, go make single user, and it's going to make that selection a single user. So now if I do seed, it's only going to affect this and not the other ones. If I select this one too, same thing. Now I can change the seed and it only affects those ones. But if I select this one right here and change the seed, it's going to also affect this one because that one's not single user yet. Okay, so now let me start importing some other tools. So let's bring in a giant vine. And now as you see, we have our own giant procedural vine tab and IV generator tab. So whatever I make in here has its own tool tab just based on what tool we're using. So all of the giant vines go in the giant vine. All of the IV generators go in the IV generator. If I bring in this vine generator, it has its own vine generator. And then also if I add snow to this person right here, there's going to be my own snow tab. So yeah, you can cycle between all of these, or if I were to just select one, it's going to go to that tab directly as well. So this is how you can navigate when having a lot of different tool systems. And then of course, if you just want to get rid of one, just click the X and it's just going to remove those. All right, time to move on to the scatter system. This section is going to be the longest just because there's the most to cover here. So let's begin. So first off, there is no emitter selected. So you're going to see right here, select an emitter to begin scattering. And also let me cover what an emitter is if you are unsure what that is. So an emitter is an object that you're going to be using for your scatter system. So if I want to start scattering objects on this plane, I will have to set this as an emitter. And same with if I have any other object I want to scatter a system on. So to do this, there's multiple ways you can go about this. The most simple way is just use this eyedropper and then select your object like this. And then now the emitter is the plane. You can also use the quick add menu. So Alt Q is going to bring up the sweeper scatter quick add menu. And you got all of these options for scattering. There's set emitter to the right, which is one of them. If I select my object right here, go Alt Q, move to the right and click, this is already an emitter. So this is what I like to do. I like pie menus just because you can very quickly just kind of, Alt Q, move up, move left, whatever, whatever option you need. And it's super quick and easy to do. But yeah, you can use either of those options. They do the exact same thing. All right, so once you have an emitter set, we can start scattering objects. So with the scatter system, you don't have to use Arborea assets to scatter. You can if you want, but you can also use your own, third-party assets or, models that you make as well. So for example, let me bring this character back in here. If I select this person, I can either click this plus right here to add scatter system. This is going to create a scatter system, or I can go Alt Q and just like before, instead of going to the right, I can go to the left and go add scatter system. And this will do the exact same thing. All right, so now that we have a scatter system, let me just show you this area right here and what everything here means. So right here, this is the name of the system, of course. So basically whatever the active object is when creating a system, that's just going to be the base name of that scatter system. But if you want to rename this, you can double click and rename it to anything, as you can see. I'm just going to undo that real fast, keep that to the default name. So right here is the instance counter. So this number is going to update based on the density of your system. So when I increase the density, you're going to see it actually keeps track of how many instances there are on this system. So I like to use this just because, especially if you're on big scenes or something and you know your system's limits, I try to keep track of this and keep my systems kind of under the limit that I know for my PC. So that's pretty helpful for me. And then right here, these two options are the exact same as these two options in the outliner. So this hides the system in the viewport, but not in the render. This hides it from the render view, but not, in the viewport. And then display as bounds. This sets your scatter system to display as bounds, which is pretty much something that you want to do for every system, especially if you have a big scene or something. If I go into rendered mode like this, the assets are still going to show, but in the shaded view, they're going to be wireframe boxes. So as you can see right here, let me actually scale this up quite a bit. So I have 18,000 instances. The viewport's moving very smoothly, but if I set this back to textured, it's not too slow, but the viewport's getting pretty laggy and kind of slow. And while it's not that bad right now, if I have a bunch of systems that are this dense, it's going to get very, very slow and laggy very fast. So I recommend turning on display as bounds, and things will get slow eventually, but it's going to take a lot longer to get to that point. So let me scale it down real fast. And then right here is the cube mask. So this is really fun to use. This is a temporary viewport mask. So while working, you can basically just use this mask, and the system's only going to show within this cube object. You can scale it up. You can do whatever you want with the shape. You can even go into edit mode and edit this shape too. You can duplicate it, do whatever you want. But usually I just use the default cube for this. And why I like this is basically, well, let me swap this out real fast because these people are kind of hard to demonstrate certain things with. All right, so basically why I like doing this is, well, as I mentioned, this only shows up in the viewport, not in the rendered mode. So say I'm detailing like a foreground or something, I'm just zoomed in like this, and I'm just hand placing some assets around right here or something like that. This is really nice because, well, as you can see, if I make this bigger, it's going to start getting pretty laggy. The render's going to take a second to update, but with it very small like this, everything updates pretty much immediately. Everything's very fast. So while I'm detailing, I can just focus on this small section right here, and then Blender won't have to render all of this stuff that I'm not actually, looking at or using. And then once I'm done, I can just turn this all back off and I'm good to go. But yeah, it's kind of slow right here. I would set this to be display as bounds, and then everything should work a little bit faster as well. All right, so now that I have multiple systems out here, let me talk about the groups, which you'll find right here, add to group. So if I select my system right here and click add to group, now you're gonna see this grass system is in its own group. I can control click this header right here to rename this if I want. So I'm gonna do something like ground, scatter, click OK. And then as you see, it's in a group. If I wanna add multiple things to this group too, I can just click the system that I wanna add to the group, and then this plus icon will show on this group header. Click this and it's gonna add it to the group. So you can see it's pretty easy to do that if you want. If you want to remove something from the group, you can just click remove from group right here, and then it will just exit and go back to how it was before. You can also create multiple groups if you want. So if I want to, say create a flower group and a ground scatter group, let me just do that real fast and show you how that will work. Okay, so I have ground scatter right here. Let me remove this because this is actually a flower. So basically red clover, that will go in ground scatter. Let's do daisy, that will go into ground scatter, and then these are going to be the flowers. So I can actually just create a new group by clicking this right here, and now we have a second group. I'm just going to control click here. Let's do flower, click OK, and then I'm just going to select these, plus this, plus, and then also you're going to see when I select this system, you can actually just click either of these pluses to add it to any of these groups. So pretty easy to do. If I want to just transfer this to a different group, I can do the same thing. Select the system, click the plus here, and now it's in this group, or you can swap back and forth. All right, so nice thing about this is these options right here affect the group systems at a group level. So I can hide everything in that group. I can set everything in that group to display as bounds, or I can set everything in that group with a cube mask. Same thing with this one. Now everything in here uses the cube masks. So now that we have our groups right here, let's talk about the syncing option, which you're going to see right here. This doesn't show up unless you have a group made or unless you toggle this emitter wide sync option too. So this group sync option is what allows you to actually sync basically any setting for this system or any system that's selected with all of the other systems within a group. So I have my flowers right here, and say I want to like increase this density, and then I want the rest of these flowers to basically have the exact same density. I can just click this right here, sync group settings, and it's going to sync all of these settings within this section here. So now all of the flowers have the exact same density. So 2.68, 2.68, 2.68, but you're going to notice also the seeds are different, and that's because of this right here. Ignore distribution seed on sync. So this just basically means this isn't going to sync the exact seed. And I have that as an option just because if this was going to sync the seed for all the systems, then everything's going to overlap, and that's just not going to be natural. So generally I want to actually just ignore that. So everything still looks natural, but the densities can sync. All right, so we have that. Let me do this now. So I'm going to select the poppies, and let's go to pattern. And let's just make some kind of like pattern distribution. So I'll increase the noise size, do something like that. So we have this pattern right here. And then if I want to make all of these other flowers have this exact same pattern setting, I can just click sync, and they're all going to have this exact same pattern setting. So this is really nice because you can sync all the settings within one single group, but not affect anything outside of that group. If you want to turn on this right here, emitter wide sync, then this is just going to ignore the groups. So you can sync, one system with every other system on an emitter, regardless of it being in a group or not. You don't even have to have groups if you have this toggled on. So like say if I create a vertex group like this, let's just say path, do something like that. And let me just draw like a path like this. I'm going to actually just invert it. This way I don't have to do a lot of like extra painting. So I just created that. If I sync, now it's going to actually sync with every single system on my emitter. So very messy. I didn't want to like create a really detailed path or anything, of course, but you guys get the point. So syncing is super helpful. I use this in pretty much every single project. It just saves so much time, so I don't have to repeat every single, option for like weight painting, density, patterns, and so on. So yeah, a very helpful feature. I love using that. But let's move on to the next section up here, the import settings. So let me close out all of these groups and then remove some of these systems. So the import settings are very good for just like performance when creating new systems. So you can actually access these two options right here as well inside of the asset browsers. And what they do is basically hide on viewport. If I create a system, it's hidden by default on import, which is good for like if you have like a very, very large terrain and you know that the system's just going to be massive by default, you can just turn down the density to 0, toggle it back on, and then very slowly bring it up just so you don't crash your system. So we have that. Let me remove this. Let's toggle that off, and then displays bounds is just going to toggle the system's displays bounds by default as well. So right here, it's displays bounds by default. Okay, so the next one is density settings. So 100% is default, which just basically means it's going to import with 100% of the default density. So that's just default, but you can actually put this to like 1% or something, and then it's going to automatically set the density of that system to 1% of the default value. So if I scatter this instance, now it's at 0.002 as opposed to the default, which is 0.2. So that's another good way that you can kind of like take care of your performance while creating systems and just kind of being careful not to like crash your system or overload it. All right, so the next section in here is the performance safety features. So this right here will essentially use either of these selected options if the system that you create has more instances than this. So I set it to 1,000 by default, but you can actually just change this to whatever you want. But let me just show you with 1,000. So I'll increase this right here to something bigger. And most likely, if I create a scatter system on here, it's going to be over 1,000 instances. And I have create object viewport mask set for this feature. So create scatter system, and it automatically created a viewport mask, which is just using this default viewport mask. You can see if I turn this off, it's 23,000. So not too bad on my system, but some people might not be able to handle that much. So having this as an option is really good to use. If you don't want the viewport mask, you can actually just toggle this off and then turn import hidden on. And then it's just going to use this right here whenever it reaches that threshold. So yeah, set this to whatever you want. And whenever it reaches that threshold, it's going to use whatever safety feature you choose. Okay, so I just created a system, and let's go just straight down the list. So multi-emitters. So a multi-emitter is the ability to basically use multiple emitters with one single scatter system. So like if you take a look at this render that I made like a month ago, a lot of my scenes have a lot of different landscape planes. So there's the foreground plane, which is completely different. There's the middle ground section, and then there's like 2 to 3 different like background mountain planes, and they're all separate emitters. But for the most part, for like these trees right here, these all share the exact same system, even though they're using different meshes. So this is super helpful for a lot of cases like that because, well, let me just show you. With these selected, you can go add selected as emitter right here in this dropdown, or you can do Alt-Q in the quick add menu and do the same thing here. And now you can see these all share that grass system, and you can see the names right here as well. So you can actually remove them, you can add more, do whatever you want. And when I update the density, it updates for all of them, change the seed, changes for all of them. If I put pattern on here, Blender just sees all of these objects as the exact same emitter. So this is super helpful if you have like very big scenes that are layered, have different, emitters or whatnot. You can create one single system, but have it be used on as many emitters as you want. I also use this for stuff like statues or architecture. If I have like a bunch of different ones like that covered in moss, I can just create one moss system and then use that same system on all of the other instances basically. If you want to remove one, you can click the trash can icon here, or you can just select this, go Alt-Q, and then remove emitter. There we go. All right, so we covered that. And then now let's go down here to our actual settings. So let's start with distribution. So let me put this back to default, and then we'll go back to this section when we get there. So you've already seen density. Density is, well, just the density of your system. How many instances are getting applied to that emitter. Viewport display is going to be super helpful for performance. So what viewport display does is you can set the viewport display like density percentage to whatever you want. So like 2% here, and it's just going to show this density in the viewport or cycles viewport. But when you click F12 and do the final render, it's going to show at the full 100% density. So you can actually just use this if your computer is being really slow on a project, have this preview density, but it will still look the same in the final render. So I highly suggest using this if you're having trouble with like lag or just like slow render times while working. Seed is just going to basically just randomize the distribution. So you can see it actually just changes position randomly of your instances. Okay, so distance minimum. So distance minimum is generally really good for stuff like architecture or like buildings or stuff like that, where you want to, like if you're scattering a city, you don't want to have your buildings just like overlap randomly like this, This is fine for nature stuff, but for like buildings and stuff like that, it can kind of get a little ugly and messy. Distance minimum allows you to actually just control the minimum distance allowed between every instance. So you can see right now with 0.35, every single instance is about an equal distance apart, but you can make them farther away or closer with this slider. Okay, turn that off and let's go to weight painting. So if you toggle this on, you can either use a vertex group you made prior, which I already made the path when I was doing the group settings. So if I actually click this, now you can see we're just using that vertex group. So if you already have one made, you can choose that here. Or if you want to create a new one, you can click this plus. Just name it to what you want. I'll do like grass or something, click OK. And then you're going to be in weight paint mode. So you can actually, paint whatever kind of group you want. Click this button here again, exits out of weight paint. You can invert it like this, or you can go back into weight paint mode and, edit it how you want. So I'm just holding left click and painting around. This adds more density. If you don't want density, you can actually hold control and erase as well. And it's pretty helpful. I use this in pretty much every project as well. All right, let's turn this off and then object mask. So this is pretty helpful for basically if you want to scatter within a certain like shape or like object. So it's kind of similar to this right here. So let me actually turn this off. So the viewport cube mask, this works pretty similar to that, but it's going to actually be for the final render, and you can actually use any shape you want. And the use case for this is, well, say you have like flower patches in a home garden or something that you need kind of like distributed within a very specific clean shape, like say something like this. As you can see right here, if you want like your flowers to be kind of scattered within this kind of shape or like this very cleanly and evenly, this is where this comes in handy. So let me just show you this right now. So I'll just like create this poppy system, add some density, and then turn on object mask. And let's create well, you can use any object you want, but I'm gonna actually use a curve. So this isn't gonna be anywhere near as clean as the picture I showed you, but I'm just gonna actually create something very kind of organic looking here. Okay, so I have this curve shape like this. Looks pretty terrible, but this is just an example. Here, let me do this real fast. There we go. So I'm just gonna convert this curve to mesh, and then in edit mode, I'm gonna select all the edges, F to fill this in, and then just extrude up so I have this shape. Cool. So we have this object right here. And as I mentioned, you can use any object you want, like any normal mesh or like a building or any object you want. So I set this right here. And then in here with object mask selected, you can either select the object right here, or you can click this button, use selected as mask, which I suggest using this right here because what this is going to do is it's going to actually set it to display as bounds. And then in the object properties, it's going to go down into visibility and then turn off all ray visibility for you. So that way, if I go into rendered view, the mask is still being applied to the scatter system, but it won't actually show up in the render. You won't actually see the object blocking the system. You're just going to get this effect for the system. So yeah, now you got this right here. If I go into edit mode, I can, select this, duplicate it, and I've got these patches. Of course, not the best looking just because I spent like 2 seconds on that, but very helpful for cases like that. Okay. Pattern. So I already covered the noise pattern a little bit, and this section just uses, just textures in the shader editor. So if you're used to noise textures, wave textures, brick textures, checker textures, all of these settings work the exact same. And then there's also a color ramp to allow you to adjust the fall off of the pattern as well. So I generally like to do something like this, make the fall off kind of sharp like this. If you bring the white value in like this, it's going to also kind of increase the density a bit. So that's super helpful to do as well. And yeah, seed is going to change the positioning. Noise scale is going to make it smaller or bigger. So you can get some really cool kind of distribution patterns this way. If you want to flip it, you can go right here, flip color ramp, and it's just going to invert and flip. All right, let me turn on wave. And also, as you can see, you can combine different patterns as well. But I'm going to turn off noise pattern and just show wave. Let's crunch these in just a little bit as well. There we go. So this is good for things like, especially if you're doing like farmland or something and you need like some crop lines, you can do so with this, or you can also like distort it, add some kind of crazy shapes, offset it if you need, and of course, flip it if you need as well. Brick, this uses a brick texture, so all of these settings work like a normal brick texture. You can, adjust the mortar size, the brick size, or you can go in here, flip it, and just scatter within the mortar as well if you want to line up some like, grasses or mosses within like the mortar of a brick. You can do so that way too. And then checker, pretty self-explanatory. This just, puts it into a checker shape as well. And you can change the scale, move it, do whatever you want with that, and it works really easily. All right. Slope and elevation. So let me just bring in a landscape right now, just a simple A&T landscape, because this already has, slope and elevation. Let's set this as a multi-emitter, so it's using the flowers as well. And I'm going to turn on slope. So by default, it's not going to do anything just because I have the max slope of 90 degrees, which means anything between 0 and 90 degrees, the scatter system is going to be allowed to scatter on. But if I set this to like 40, now you're going to see there's no instances scattering on anything more than 40 degrees. So this is good for if you're like scattering trees or something and your environment has like cliffs and super steep hills like that you don't want to actually scatter your trees on. This is just going to automatically take care of that for you. So you don't have to like weight paint away any of that or anything like that. You can just handle where it scatters based on slope with this control. You can invert that as well and also adjust the minimum slope as well too if you want to, not scatter on flat ground as well. And let me show you elevation now. So elevation allows you to limit where it's scattering based on the elevation of the system. So this is really good, especially if you're making like rivers or lakes or something too. I use this a lot because, let me just show you real fast. So I just very quickly made this very basic river. So basically what I like to do with this is if I turn on elevation for this, you can turn up the elevation minimum just until the instances stop scattering underneath the water. So you can see right here, just along the water line. If I bring down the water now, you're going to see nothing scattering underneath that. So this is really nice because you can create a kind of like messier weight group, and kind of paint along these edges without having to worry about like, accidentally painting underneath the water. You can do that if you want to, and then just use elevation to make sure, the instances avoid the water's height in general. So yeah, that is super nice to use. I use that for every project as well. And let's move on to proximity. So proximity, let's bring in a deciduous tree, something like, let's just do this hornbeam. Put that right here. And right now I have nothing in here, so nothing's happening, but you can either choose a collection. So, if you have a collection of assets that you want to have the system get affected by, you can choose that there, or you can select whatever objects you want. It can be more than one, and then click this plus, and it's going to create a collection out of that selected object, as you can see right here. And again, nothing's going to happen because the distance is very small by default. But if I increase this, now you're going to see the system's going to repel away from that object. You can adjust the fall off like this, or you can make it very sharp if you want. Or you can also use noise so that the fall off's a little bit more natural and random. If you want to invert this, you can make it so that it actually attracts like this, so that, you know, there's no scattering after a certain distance. And of course, you can use these settings as well. And then right down here, you can control density and scale. So what is happening right here is, well, if I set this to 0, nothing's going to happen. If I set density to 1, now the closer it gets, the lower the density is going to go until it hits 0. If I put this back down to 0 and I put scale up to 100%, instead of actually lowering the density the closer it gets, it's going to actually scale closer to 0 the closer it gets to the asset. So you can choose whatever you want right here. I did a default of 25% and then 100% for density. I felt like that looked pretty good, but you can do whatever you want with this in whatever, you know, works best for your system. Okay, let's turn that off and go into scale. All right, so global scale, pretty self-explanatory. This just scales your assets globally, equally along, you know, every transform X, Y, and Z. And here you can actually control the individual axis scaling. So you can see I can scale it only on the Z axis if I want. And then scale seed is going to be the random scale seed. So if the scales are kind of weird for certain trees or plants or something like that, you can just randomize this if you want with the seed until you get something that looks good. Okay. And then random scale. This is basically the scale range for all of your assets. So if I set this to 1 to 1, every asset's going to be the exact same size. If I set this to 0, it's going to be 0 to 1. So the biggest an asset's going to be is 100% of the global scale. And the smallest an asset can be is, well, 0% because I set this to 0. So you can see some of these assets are very, very, very small, like this right here. And then some of them are 100% scale. So this just adds a little bit more natural variety. I always find around 0.55 to be a pretty good middle ground. So that's the default value. And then scale cluster. So this is very similar to the noise pattern, but instead of the noise texture actually affecting density, it's affecting the scaling. So you can see right here, we're not actually lowering the density or anything. We're just affecting the scaling, which is really cool for some like natural kind of variance on like larger grass plains. Like if you're doing like a meadow or something, you can get some really cool effects this way. So I use this a lot too. I love this feature. Very fun one to use. Rotation. So random rotation, it's set to 360 by default, which let me do this real fast. I'm just going to do replace an active, which is going to actually swap the selected asset into the same system. And let me set this to 0. So now you can see since I set this to 0, everything is rotated the exact same way. This just, you know, randomizes the twist. So by default, it's at 360 degrees just because I find that to be a good default value, and then 0 on the X and Y by default. But generally for things like grass, flowers, and smaller plants like that, I'll do around 10 on the X and Y to maybe about 20. For taller things like trees and like stuff like that, I'll probably go a little bit lower, like 5 or so degrees. So this just kind of depends on what kind of random rotation you want, but I definitely recommend using random rotation if you're scattering nature assets. It can really help with the kind of variance and kind of natural look to it. And then also random rotation seed is the seed of your random rotation. Okay, let me put this to 0 real fast so I can show you the X and Y rotation. So this just rotates everything equally. This isn't the random rotation. This is the actual entire rotation of every single instance, as you can see. So if you need to kind of tilt things a certain way, you can do so with this, which as you can see, things are kind of acting weird where the river is and where that hill is. And the reason for this too is the align Z axis rotation. So now that's going to actually fix everything if you align everything like that, as you can see. So let me actually give you a better example of what this is doing though. So if I just bring in this plane real fast and scale this up, let's just rotate this up like this and then create this as a multi-emitter. So by default, your system's going to basically scatter and follow the surface normal of whatever it's scattering on. So you can see the plane is facing this way, and so is the system. If I turn this up to 1, no matter what the slope is, now my system is facing 100% straight up on the Z-axis. So this is good for stuff like trees, buildings, anything that you need to have kind of based more vertically. But generally for things like grasses and smaller assets like that, I like to use 0% here and have it follow the surface normal. I find that to be a little bit more realistic. All right, remove that. Great. And I'm gonna go in here and actually swap the grass back in here, or let me actually use flowers. So I'm gonna do swap system, which same thing. It just keeps the exact same system and it just removes the previous assets and swaps for the new ones. And I'll cover that in a little bit as well, but yeah. So rotation snapping, I guess I could have actually kept the people in there before. So let me actually do that real fast. So rotation snapping actually allows you to snap the rotation to whatever degrees you want. So let me put random rotation to 360 on the z-axis. And then as you can see with snap, it actually just snaps to 45 degrees only. If I want to do 25 degrees, now they're only rotated by 25-degree increments. If I want to do 180, now everything is only 180 degrees in rotation. So this is really good for like buildings, architecture, anything that you need to have control over the exact kind of snapping and like even rotation distribution. So yeah, that's rotation snapping. And then let me actually swap this back in now. So swap system, there we go. Increase the density. Let's put something like 10. Great. Wind. So wind is really good for generally like basic wind. So if you need like wind on like a grass system, flowers, something smaller, I wouldn't recommend this for like trees or taller assets, just because this is rotation based wind and it's just rotating the instances over time using a noise texture. So this is generally what I use for stuff like this, like flowers and grasses and stuff. Speed will increase the speed of the system. And then scale is the scale of the noise texture that's basically displacing the rotation over time. Strength is just basically how much the instances are going to get rotated. So you can see now it's a little bit stronger of wind. And then direction allows you to change the direction. And then distortion just kind of distorts this and makes it a bit more chaotic. So if I bring this up, let's bring it up a little bit faster. Now it's going to get a little bit more chaotic. Generally, I'll just use something very small if I do use that. But yeah, that is wind. Okay, so let's go into the instances now and talk about camera culling. So I just changed this to a grass system and then made it a little bit bigger so that we can kind of go over this a little bit more easily. So if you don't know what camera culling is, let me kind of explain what is happening. So basically you're able to control where the distribution of your scatter system is happening based on what is visible in your camera. So I can just choose my camera in here and then enable camera culling. And now as you can see, anything that's not visible in the camera is not going to be showing in the scatter system. So this is going to help your scatter system like performance so much just because, well, turn this off. I have almost 40,000 instances. Turn this back on. That's cut in half. That's 16K. If I go into here, you can also affect the field of view, crunch this in, push this back out if you need a little bit more headroom. So you can control that with that. And then extended camera is going to, well, as you see, it's not actually extending to the camera right here. It's just kind of stopping once it's not visible within the camera range and also whatever you have kind of set for this field of view. Extended camera is just going to make sure no matter what, it just goes to your camera. And I like this just because a lot of times in foregrounds, I want to have some like ferns and like arecas and other plants kind of scattered underneath the camera and kind of peeking out right here. So that's helpful for stuff like that. You're going to want to also make sure that you set your camera resolution for your scene directly in here. For me, it's set to 4000 by 5000 by default, just because this is what I use for almost every single render of mine. So that's just why it's the default. But if you have a different value in here, like say 4K or something, 3000 by 2000, it's not going to update right here unless you click sync resolution or type it in manually. But the sync resolution is just going to automatically input what is inputted here directly right here, so you don't have to. So I'm going to put this back to 4000, 5000, sync that. There we go. So we have camera culling and then distance culling as well. This allows you to actually just cull based on the distance away from the camera. So you can actually limit the distance of your scatter system. So I'll put something like that. Closest is going to be the exact opposite. So if you don't want something to be as close to the camera, you can limit that there. Like if you only want to be past the river or something. And then fall off is something that is really helpful. So you can see I have 16,000 now. Without this, it's almost 40,000. But then fall off allows me to actually use a gradient to lower the density the farther away from the camera I'm scattering. So if I go into here and let's say adjust the fall off to about 35, you can't really tell too much of a difference on like the density in these farther points, but you can right here, of course. So if this was less dense right here, you would notice it, but it's not as noticeable back here. So we can actually lower the density and still have it look relatively similar. And with doing that, now I have 9,000 as opposed to the original 40,000 before any of these cooling settings. You can still kind of tell a little bit that's a little less dense back here. So to fake the density, I also use distance scaling, which also affects the scatter system over a distance as well from the camera. So let me actually increase this max scaling to something more visible, like 10. I wouldn't want to actually use this for a final render. 10 is quite a bit, but this is just so you can actually visualize what's happening. So right here is minimum scale, which is the default scale of 1. This is whatever your global scale is. And that's what it's starting out as right here. And then the maximum scale is, well, the biggest your system's going to scale to. And I can actually control where the scaling starts by moving this closer, like over here. So you can see it's only starting at this distance that I specify here. It's not actually scaling until it hits this point. And then scaling n will bring this back to something a little closer. So you can see between this distance range, it's scaling from 1 to 10. Right here to here. And generally the way I like using this is I'll just probably use something more close to like 2 on the max scale, maybe 3 if it's really far away. But now as you can see, before, after, it looks pretty much identical in terms of scale and density. So now you can see 9,000 instances, and then before culling, almost 40,000. And it looks almost identical. Let me turn that off, and we'll go down to the edit instances now. So this is where you can actually edit and control your instances. I'm going to go into render mode. Okay, so we have this, and here you can add selected objects. So similar to if I do Alt-Q and I have like a selected object here and I click add to active, it's just going to add that selected object to this system. You can remove it with the trash can like this. And then of course, if I click this and click add select, it's going to do the exact same thing as I just did. If I select an object right here, it's going to actually select in the outliner as well, which right now the outliner is, well, pretty simple. There's not a lot of objects, but at least in my scenes, I sometimes have thousands and thousands of objects. So it can be kind of hard to navigate to where these are in the outliner directly. So having this is super helpful because I can just select this, go into here, click period on the number pan to focus on it, and it's just going to automatically, navigate me to where it's at. And then this button right here is going to let you actually adjust the materials for these instances as well. I am about to add a convert system to linked and local button right here, which essentially is going to do this, but to all of your scattered instances. That will be in like probably the next update, but let me just do this manually real fast. There we go. So yeah, as I mentioned, the assets have to be made local to adjust the materials. So just like a normal asset with this section. But yeah, I can click this right here to open up the materials. And this just uses the normal node groups. So by default, if you have like, all of these grass instances in here, they're all going to be single user materials, as you can see, which generally is good in a lot of cases too, because, well, if I make one a little bit more yellow or a little bit more orange, maybe this one slightly less orange, we can kind of create this like kind of natural variance like this very easily this way. But if you want all of the objects that have the same materials to not be single user and just combined, you can click this right here to combine the duplicate materials, and then it's all going to share that same material. I can adjust the hue all together, and they all change the same. So yeah, that is super helpful, and I think that is it for the instances section. And before I'm done, let me cover a few more things like the quick add menu. So I already showed you guys a bit of how this all works, of course, but let me just give you a bit more of an overview. So set as emitter, this is this right here directly in the quick add menu. Add as multi-emitter, this is where you can basically select an object, add that as the multi-emitter. And then add scatter system is where you can just create a new scatter system from a selected object. And then add to active is where you can actually add the selected object into that active system. And then also replace an active is going to basically look in this system right here, remove all of these instances, and then just add the selected objects into that system instead while keeping the exact same settings. If I go into here now, all of these options are the exact same as well. So you're going to see scatter asset, add to active system, swap system, exact same thing. And then also if you're scattering from your asset browser, So if you have assets in here that are not Arborea related, you can use this menu right here. So you can, select your assets like this, scatter asset, or you can go to the drop down and there's these same things as well. If you're scattering from the asset browser, I do recommend scattering with linked on, just because depending on what drive your asset browser's on, it might take a while to import. Linked is just going to be a little bit faster to work with, and it's going to import a little bit more quickly. All right, so I think that is about it for the overview of the add-on. If I missed anything, let me know. If you have any questions, also let me know. You can go down here into feedback, bug report. If you have any bugs, of course, let me know. But if you need help as well, you can just click this too and contact me there. Or you can come onto my Discord, DM me, or just message me directly in my server, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Yeah, hopefully that helps. And if you guys make anything cool with this add-on, feel free to post it, tag me in it, or send me whatever you make with it, because I always just want to see you guys' work and what you guys make with this. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys in future videos.